So you're 40 years old and you are about to sell your company for $10 million. What do you do? So in this video, I'm going to walk you through some of the framework that we use as we analyze that scenario. We've come across it quite a few times throughout our career. And so we just want to give out some ideas, things to think about if this happens to be you. And so ultimately, the first thing you have to determine, and let's just make sure we're on the same page here. So we got 10 million bucks that's about to come in to your overall situation, and you're only 40 years old, okay? So the first thing you need to make sure you understand is the tax ramifications of this sale. Now, every sale is going to be totally different, but it's pretty uncommon for someone going through this to not have good tax advice from their CPA. And so just make sure that you're coordinating with that CPA and that CPA firm quite a bit leading up to this sale. In this video, I'm not going to get into all of the things that you can consider doing, but there's a handful of things that you can be thinking about and doing to try to reduce that tax liability, but it all depends on your situation and what your CPA says you can and can't do. So that's the first thing that you've got to figure out. Because let's just, for simplicity, let's say that out of the 10 million bucks, we've got to set aside, let's say 30%, okay? So in that potential scenario, we've got $3 million that is now gone, right? So we look at the scenario now, we've got $7 million left. Well, here is kind of some of the basics as we start to look through this. So you figured out taxes, but now here's the real core question that you have to ask yourself. What am I going to do? What are you going to do with your life? Now, if you're anything like all the people we've dealt with and you've put your heart and soul into building this company, it's going to be extremely difficult to just shut it off and to not be doing all the things that you've been used to. So I think it's vitally important that you know what the next phase is for you and how you might find purpose and fulfillment. If you don't have that, that'd probably be the first thing that I would do before I even sold the company. What am I going to do with my life? How do I make sure that I can still find purpose and fulfillment if this business that I've created all these years is gone? Okay, so you have to factor that in there. And ultimately that will shape pretty much the remainder of what I will talk about here. Because let's assume that you decide, you know what, I'm going to maintain working for the company that I sold for a period of time, right? Well, that's one way to do it. Another one might be, you know, I'm just going to take a few years off and then I'll get back in it. But I just want to relax for just a short period of time. That could be another option. But here's what the kind of general principles that don't really change. Ultimately, out of the $7 million, you really have to think about these three buckets that you need to be thinking about. So let's just go back to our 7 mil. So I want you to think about three different buckets of money that you need to be thinking about. Number one, how much cash do you want to have on hand at all times, at any given time? Now, if you're like most of the people we've dealt with, you like to take advantage of opportunities as they come to you. So you don't want your money tied up. You don't want it in some, aggressive investment that maybe is at a bad time to sell when you need it. So how much money do you need to set aside just for cash? Now, another factor that kind of comes into this is there any debts that you want to pay off? Maybe you want to pay off your home. Probably one of the most complicated decisions for most people is whether they really want to pay off their home because most people have a really low interest rate. And it's really an emotional decision to pay that home off these days, but something you got to factor in. Then you're going to move into the second phase, or the second bucket, which is all about income. So out of the 7 million, do I need monthly income to support our lifestyle? So if you're sitting there and you're thinking, well, I actually don't need income because I'm going to stay working for some base salary and that's enough to support my lifestyle. Well, maybe you don't need a lot in the income bucket. But if you're in the camp where you're saying, I'm going to take 3 years off and I actually need to take money from my remaining 7 million, well, we've got to put some money in that bucket. So, and the way you invest income investments is very different, right, from cash, and it's very different from growth. And so once you've kind of set aside, all right, I know how much I want to have in cash. I know how much we need on a monthly basis from our income bucket. Well, now we can go out here and say, okay, how much money do we want to have in our growth bucket? Now, in each one of these buckets, every person is going to be so drastically different. And it's going to be based on your experience and what you've dealt with throughout your career. But another thing that you have to ask yourself as you're building this out is, I want you to think about this, how active or non-active do I want to be? You know, one of the things that can happen is when you move into this next phase and you sell your company, maybe you actually want to be really active with all of your money and you want to know what it's doing all the time and you want to be making the decisions continually. That's an option. I would say most of the time, the things that we've dealt with is those business owners are really tired and they're pretty worn out because they've been building this thing for years and making decisions and they're just tired. And so that would mean that they're probably in the non-active or passive arena where they just want to say, Tony, where do I put this money to where I don't have to think about it, but it does its purpose and it just happens and I don't have to be involved all the time. So you have to ask yourself kind of where you sit in this category, because a lot of times you may find that if you're in this active stage, you may find that a lot of the business owners that we've dealt with, they really like real estate. And so you may find that you're actually going to go replace all of your income through an income bucket, and you've chosen that that's going to be real estate. And so that's not uncommon for us to see where the business owner actually takes a big portion of their money and their whole goal is to go replace their income with real estate. And so what it ends up being is they've taken a bunch of money for them to actively manage themselves. And then they have some money over here where they say, Tony, what are some things that I can be doing that are really passive where I can not be thinking about it so that I can just focus on this? And so all of a sudden this opens up over here, and in the growth category, whether it's, you know, stocks or different types of alternatives or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, this is kind of the overall framework that our young people are using as they're navigating this next stage of life. You know, along the way, one last piece that I will say is, you know, as you have big exits like this, one of the things that you will constantly be doing every year is evaluating your tax situation and evaluating your liability. And that just comes down to making sure that you're not leaking any tax money through the cracks. And at the same time, you're not taking on unnecessary risk, because the last thing that at least our business owners have wanted to go through is to have to go back into building that business again. Now, I think all of them could do it. They don't want to be forced to do it. Most of them move on to that next phase and they do it happily because they have freedom to make that decision on what they want to do. So you guys, if any of you are coming into this situation, you're asking yourself, okay, I've got all this money now, what do I do? These are some of the general principles that I would be thinking about as you map out where you put the money, you know, what life looks like, and ultimately trying to find purpose in this next phase of life. Hopefully this is helpful. Please share it with your friends and family, and you can also subscribe to our channel. Thanks so much.